Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest, returning guest. His name is Steven Delay. Last name is spelled Delay. This will be our third discussion. He was on late last year. We talked about two different topics. One was his book, Finding Meaning, Essays of Philosophy, Nihilism, and the Death of God, which kind of overlaps with what we're going to talk to today. And then we talked about Terrence Malick. That was Life Above the Clouds, Philosophy in the Films of Terrence Malick. And he will be, I think, my fifth. It'll be my fifth guest of talking about a new publication from the Decoding Culture Foundation and the magazine that they put out, digital, and will be a hard copy magazine as well, is titled Cultural Engineering Studies. And I've talked to Collins Brothers, Horsley, Carollo, and Mellery about their article. So this article is titled, Forget It, Jake, It's Chinatown, Revelation of the Method and Cultural Demoralization in Film Noir. This is a part one, and it's about the film Chinatown. If you're watching this on Rockfin, Rumble, or X, you'll see a picture of this, the two main characters, P.I. Giddis and then Mulray. Anyway, she had an interesting relationship with Polanski too. I'll tell you more about that. But anyway, it's a great, fantastic article, very detailed, and opened my eyes to this film that I've probably seen 3 or 4 times, and I'll probably have to watch again. But Stephen can talk more about that. So Steven Delay, welcome back to the show.
Hi, William. Thanks for having me. Really happy to be here.
Yeah, so for people who hadn't heard our newer interviews or what's going on over at the Decoding Culture Foundation, maybe you can talk a little bit about your background and your books and what led up to you publishing this article, Forget It, Jake, It's Chinatown.
I am a philosopher and a writer, so I've written some novels and also a number of academic volumes in philosophy. And I became familiar with the work that Brett and Thomas do at PsyOps Cinema. And I got in touch with them, and they got to know me a little bit, my work. And what we did was we began a series on the filmography of Terrence Malick, which is still ongoing. We're actually going to be recording the 9th episode on A Hidden Life very shortly. And they learned a little bit about my work and found out that I have an interest in parapolitics and conspiracy theory and all the kind of things that you and others in this community research. And so we've been collaborating together on PsyOps Cinema, as I said, with the Malick series. And also we've done a couple episodes on True Detective. So we did an episode on True Detective Season 1 and then an episode on True Detective Season 2. And probably we'll be doing an episode on Season 3 as well. And anyway, Brett told me that he was planning to launch a magazine and asked if I would like to contribute to it. And so I thought, well, what could I write for the magazine? And so I decided that I would write a long essay on film noir, because film noir, as probably everyone knows who's ever seen a noir, is in some ways a deeply philosophical film genre. And so I thought that film noir would be a suitable topic of philosophical analysis, but not only a topic of philosophical analysis, also a gateway into what we call revelation of the method, and then in turn what I take to be one of the functions of the role of revelation of the method in film noir, which is demoralization. And so the more I thought about it, I said, well, I want to say something about this film genre in general and cinema in general. But what's a film that I should focus on to try to make the points that I wish to make? And then I said, well, if your analysis can't say something useful and potentially novel about a film like Chinatown, then it's probably not worth writing. So I said, well, I'm going to analyze Chinatown. And so the piece that came out in issue 1 in the inaugural issue of CES is part 1 of what will be a 3-part essay, which is in effect just actually one very long essay, but there's no way to print the entire thing in one issue. So the first 2 parts of this essay are going to be specifically on Chinatown. The second part will appear in issue 2 of the magazine next year. And then part 3 of the essay will be focusing on a classic noir from 1950, directed by Otto Preminger, starring Dana Andrews and Gene Tierney, called Where the Sidewalk Ends. And then it will also be focusing on a neo-noir from the 1980s that was written by Oliver Stone, directed by Michael Cimino, starring Mickey Rourke, called Year of the Dragon. And in short, the idea behind this piece is to argue that even though obviously film and literature and film and text are different, there's a sense in which we talk about reading a film or interpreting a film. We can get into the details and see what's there. And so what I wanted to do was view Chinatown very closely and treat it as a text, as it were, and read it and find what are the details that Polanski has put in this film that are functioning as revelation of the method. In other words, what's in this film that's showing audiences how the world really works. And then the question becomes, what's the point behind Polanski having revealed these facts about how the world works? And that's where my thesis about demoralization will come in ultimately part 3 of the essay.
Right. It's pretty disturbing. You open up with the kind of you open up with a quote from Aristotle, all men by nature desire to know. So we are wanting to know this kind of mystery that begins when Mulray walks into his office and unfolds. And we basically are following around Giddis, right, as he's doing this. So he's kind of our stand-in for the narrative, correct?
Exactly. So the PI is played by Jack Nicholson, Giddis, and the basic plot of the film, of course, if everybody's probably seen it, is that he's asked to do matrimonial work. A woman comes to his office, alleging that her husband is being unfaithful, and so he begins to tail this guy named Hollis Mulray, who is the Los Angeles head of the water department. And it turns out that, in fact, Hollis isn't really having an affair. He's murdered. And then the question becomes, well, who is it that had Hollis murdered and why? And then this is where things become more complicated because Giddis's eventual love interest, Evelyn Mulray, Hollis's wife, it turns out that actually she wasn't the one to originally hire Giddis. It was an imposter, a woman who was pretending to be her. And so then the question becomes, well, who put Giddis up to tail Hollis and what was the motivation in that? And so one of the subplots, of course, is the history of Los Angeles and the water wars and the corruption that went into all the farming, the farm valley land. So it turns out that Evelyn's father is a very powerful man in Los Angeles, and he was the one who hired Giddis to tail Hollis, and he also murdered Hollis. And the reason why he had Hollis murdered was that he's buying up the land by diverting the water so that he can suppress the real estate value in these farms. And then once the farmers have left and he and his friends have purchased the land on the cheap, they can re-irrigate it with this dam that they want to construct that Hollis was going to block as the engineer. So with Hollis out of the way, they can buy up the land, build the dam, and then make a fortune off of developing the land in Los Angeles. And so, yeah, it's a murder investigation, or at least it begins that way, an investigation into who kills Hollis. And then it becomes a question of why was Hollis murdered and who's behind the murder. And then it becomes, in some ways, about much more than that. I would say ultimately it's a film about the nature of evil and the kind of corruption and systematic evil that runs our society. And we are, in a way, playing the role of the detective. We are, as you say, seeing the things from the perspective of Giddis. So we're trying to piece it together, what's going on as we view the film. And I should just say that I think that this gets into the idea of the revelation of the method and the demoralization is that Polanski is deliberately piquing our curiosity as viewers, that we have a desire, as Aristotle says, to know, that we want to get to the bottom of what happened. And then Polanski, in a way, warns us that maybe we shouldn't want to actually know how things work. So there's a kind of threat involved, I think, that Polanski is giving to the audience, that in a way we're better off not knowing how the world really works because we can't really handle it. Or even if we come to understand how it works, we're helpless and powerless to change it. Hence the famous last line of the movie, which is the title for the piece, "Forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown."
Right. And it isn't incredible how blurred the lines are between the real lives of these people and this film. Like the fact that Polanski's in there with the knife, Houston's sketchy past,
Mm-hmm.
Nicholson's sketchy past and present, maybe. But yeah, no, it's really, and I think that that's it. So this is after everything that happened on Cielo Drive with Manson, right, in '69. So this film was made in '74, and the the allegations, I guess people would, maybe scholars of like Manson would know better, but like Polanski and his wife Sharon Tate were involved in all kinds of heavy duty stuff. So a lot of that stuff was covered up. There were supposedly films and parties and very dark things happening. So it's strange how these guys are in LA and this is happening. And it kind of actually ties in curiously to your True Detective season 2 analysis too. So it's another sketch that's based on like a literal city in LA or a sub city that was like horrifically corrupt. It was just like they were like siphoning off millions of dollars or something. And it's actually super corrupt because the actual building of the high-speed rail here is almost laughably corrupt. I don't know if you know this story, but they found a piece that you probably have in Manteca. There was like a $6 billion 100-yard bridge or something. No, it's a true story. And it's just sitting there. Nobody went to jail. Nothing happened. It's just incredible. Like there's nothing leading up to it. Now, it's almost like a monolith to California corruption, like blazing corruption. So these are like real stories. It is really something, and I think reading your article really opened that up to me, as well as one of the aspects I did, subtlety, maybe not so subtle, is Gittes is kind of a chump. He's kind of a clumsy goof. He likes to think of himself as a tough guy, but in some ways, he almost as a character that symbolizes the rest of humanity. Right? So we're all kind of getting played as chumps.
Exactly. No, I want to come to the question of Gittes, who he represents, namely us, the audience, and why he's presented in the way he is, and what the message behind that, I think, from Polanski is, and then also, I had mentioned Year of the Dragon, the '80s, Stone Semino, neo noir. I'll say something about what I consider to be the subversion of the noir hero, the archetype of the hero, and how that itself is playing a role in the demoralization of the society as the evolution of noir progresses from the 40s and 50s into the 80s. How the way in which the hero himself is depicted changes is a way reflective of the actual social decay of the society itself, which has been decaying partly because of the movies that are shaping the culture in the way that it is. But as far as California corruption is concerned, yeah, you're certainly right. I mean, I'm a native California. I was born in California from San Jose, and so I know about the high speed rail project. And in fact, I had mentioned that in the episode 2 we did on True Detective, because it seems to me that Pizzolatto must have been inspired by this story. And so, yeah, there's a kind of Chinatown subtext or subplot in season 2 of True Detective, because just as in Chinatown, Cross and his cronies are trying to buy up the land on the cheap by diverting the water, then, as everybody will remember in True Detective season 2, the land is being poisoned so that they can then buy it up for cheap later, and then develop commercially everything that's going to go up around the rail line. You mentioned Houston. We could say a lot about Polanski, but the interesting thing about Houston, I didn't know until looking into him a little bit, and all of this is public record. It's right on his Wikipedia page, so you don't have to be a sleuth to figure this out. But Houston himself was involved in a number of car accidents, too, of course, when he was back in the 1930s, when he was a young man, first breaking into Hollywood as a screenwriter, one of which was actually a fatal car accident where he struck a woman on Sunset Boulevard. And in both of these car accidents, he was driving drunk. And both times, even though the second one led to a fatality, he dodged jail time, and the inquest absolved him of any guilt. And it was after the second accident on Sunset Boulevard that he fled to Europe for a time. And then when things calmed down, he came back, and that's when he started directing movies in the 40s and went on to become a very powerful director. He directed The Maltese Falcon in 1941, which is one of the most famous and influential classic noirs. But then there was a third car accident many years later, when his wife at the time died in a car accident in France as well. And so here I was thinking about Oliver Stone's Blowout with John Travolta. But as I say in the article, anyone who's familiar with the criminal underworld and the nature of contract killing and assassinations knows that very often people are murdered through what are meant to be appear to be car accidents. And they're not accidents. So, there's sabotage in the vehicle, or people run off the road, or whatever it may be. And very often it's complicated. I mean, there's various reasons for why this will be done. Obviously, it's to kill the person who's killed because they have information that they may not want to be disclosed, or maybe they're refusing to cooperate in certain ways, or they're a loose end. Sometimes it's a threat to other people. And so these things are coded. So I speculate in the article, whether or not Houston's involvement in these first two car crashes, he may have, in some sense, been put up to it to kill this woman in what would appear to be an accident, so that he would be initiated or blooded, and then he could come into Hollywood. Whether he'd been hired to do that, whether he was encouraged to do it, they were testing him to see if he would do something like that. But in any case, he was clearly protected because he never went to jail. And this is all very reminiscent of the character he plays in Chinatown, Noah Cross, who's very much above the law. And of course, that's the final thing that Evelyn Mulray, his daughter, played by Faye Dunaway, says in the infamous scene when she's trying to protect her daughter, Catherine, from being abducted by Noah Cross. She says, well, he owns the police. So Polanski really is showing us, I think, not only how Los Angeles corruption works, but how police corruption functions in general. And, Polanski was very much drawing on the actual history of California. One final thing I can say about that before just making some brief remarks about Gittes is that, I grew up hearing stories about Los Angeles and Catalina Island because that's where my dad was born. And there's a Catalina tie-in in Chinatown because the scene in which Gittes travels to visit the ranch where Cross lives was shot at Catalina. And the club that in the film Noah Cross runs is called the Albacore Club, which is based on a real club at Catalina, which was called the Tuna Club of Avalon, which was a hub for Hollywood royalty in the early 20th century, and a lot of politicians as well. So people like Bing Crosby and Charlie Chaplin, Cecil DeMille, Herbert Hoover, George Patterson, Teddy Roosevelt, Grover Cleveland, all sorts of people. Clark Gable used to go out to the island. And so I think, as you had mentioned with True Detective Season 2, there's clearly a blackmail and an extortion angle to what's going on in Hollywood, in old Hollywood, the Hollywood that Houston knows, the Hollywood that Polanski knows. And it's a huge subtext and subplot in Chinatown itself, because part of what's going on with Gittes is that he's less than scrupulous. And so there's a suggestion that the people who know him actually think that he's more than capable of extortion. And I think that Polanski, again, is showing us that Gittes, a private detective who used to be a policeman, is willing to bend the rules. And there's blackmail, there's extortion, and then, as everybody knows from Dave McGowan, there's also contract killing. And finally, as for Gittes himself, yes, he's not that as smart as he thinks he is. I mean, he's in over his head. And that's why Polanski, of course, gives him the bandage over his nose, because he's meant to kind of look like a goofball, and he's meant to kind of look like a dupe. And of course, it's Polanski himself who has the cameo at the dam when Gittes is trying to investigate what's going on with the water and who may have killed Hollis Mulray, that it's Polanski, the man with the knife, who threatens to cut Gittes's nose off. And the threat that he gives Gittes, as I explained in the article, I think is more or less a threat to the audience. So the viewer who's hip to what's going on in the film figures out that this is revelation of the method. This is actually a threat from Polanski to say, hey, don't look into this. And it's this omnipotence fantasy, this projection of power, that Polanski can show you a film where he discloses all of his criminality, all the criminality that someone like Houston himself was involved in, show it to audiences, and he is above the law, just as Noah Cross is above the law in the film itself. And so probably at the time in the 70s, in the wake of the Manson killings and everything else, there would have been people who were aware of the kind of criminality that's being shown in this film that was really going on in Los Angeles. So imagine how they would feel when they would go to a theater, watch this movie, and have to tell their wife or girlfriend, like, you won't believe it, like, that's real, like, I know it's based on this character. Like, if a former detective or some guy who's in the police or something, he knows, like, well, that's exactly what the district attorney really is like, like the idea that you're not supposed to do much of anything, like, this is how you would sound crazy. So that's the demoralization as well, I would say, is that it's meant to bring audiences into a state of apathy where they learn to just accept this kind of corruption as part of how the world really works. a kind of learned helplessness. And then I also think it's a form of demoralization whereby those who are in the know, who have some kind of connection to these events and may want to try to expose it, they're demoralized into seeing like, well, what's the point in going to the paper or doing anything about it? Because the criminals themselves, who I think I have the dirt on, they can make movies about their own criminality and nothing happens to them.
Right. No, it's incredible when you think about it. And it's always been stories in LA of just a company town, really, just the studio heads bossing the legal around payoffs, tons of cover-ups, tons of mysterious deaths. Mysterious death of maybe one of the most mysterious ones is Natalie Wood in Catalina on a boat, water death. Nobody gets arrested.
Christopher Walken, yeah, they're all there. Yeah,
Wagner's there, right? Wagner comes back and does some really sus stuff. Who's he talked to? I think he talked to Sidney Korchak, or like a known intermediary between the studios and.
Well, I mean, perhaps I'm mistaken, but wasn't it Natalie Wood who was also, when she was younger, abused by Sinatra? Is that it?
There was a story that she was raped by Douglas.
Kirk Douglas. Okay,
Kirk Douglas at the Chateau Marmont, right? Infamous.
Okay, yeah, but I swear she was involved with Sinatra too when she was underage. I maybe it wasn't her, but I think it was her. Anyway, the point is that yeah, even going back to the period of classic noir when Houston was coming up in the 40s and 50s, the golden age of Hollywood. Anyone who thinks that, well, this kind of stuff only happened recently with Harvey Weinstein, no, they're wrong. I mean, this is how Hollywood has always worked, right? Always.
Yeah, always. It's always been like an open air kind of flesh pot, as in one way to put it, I guess, from a biblical perspective, which you can take in multiple ways. But yeah, I mean, and even the Hodel story, you go into that, like, this is Houston's friend. And it gets super dark. The Black Dahlia, I don't know if it gets any darker. Man Ray and this kind of art overlapping with him and these sophisticated guys. I always got the feeling of Noah Cross and Houston in this. It's almost Luciferian Mephisto feel, like he's above the law, but almost in like an occult, like very sinister, evil way. Obviously, he's pedophile, he's raping his daughter, whatever you call it. I don't know what you call it, but yeah, it's and that flows over in real life. Nicholson's interesting friendships, and Polanski has to know the occult, after the Ninth Gate and all that stuff. Like, he knows all
well, I mean, it's Tom O'Neill, the book that everyone's been talking about. I know you interviewed O'Neill, I think it was a number of years ago when the book first came out. I've
2019. Yeah, 2019.
Yeah, and there's actually a piece from that book that I'll be using probably for the introduction of part 3, where I again, having established the revelation of the method thesis through this careful textual exposition of Chinatown, then I raised the question, okay, well, if it's revelation of the method, how do you know that it's meant to demoralize us, right? And there's two ways to make this argument, and they're entwined. One way is to say, well, let's look at the evolution of the genre itself, from classic noir to neo-noir. Now, of course, Chinatown's considered a neo-noir. I decided to start with neo-noir to show the way in which, at this point in noir history, the archetype of the hero is already being subverted. So in part 3, I'll turn back to classic noir to show how the Dana Andrews character from Where the Sidewalk Ends is very different in a way from Gittes. And then by showing that difference, I can say, well, here's how it really comes to a head in a film like 1985's Year of the Dragon, where the Mickey Rourke character, Stanley, is not, he's an anti-hero. And so this is the demoralization, is what I'm saying, is that in cinematic history, through the evolution or the de-evolution of the hero, the to anti-hero, you can see the cultural engineering, how it's shaping audiences to basically become apathetic and to become cynical, to not really believe that there is any such thing as a good guy, that all you have is a flawed hero. And then finally, the line gets so sufficiently blurred that there's really not any genuine distinction between good men and bad men, good guys and bad guys. So that's one aspect of the demoralization thesis. This just comes from viewing the films themselves and kind of tracing the logic that's in the films themselves. But then there's, of course, evidence from outside the film. If we look at the lives of the people who are involved in making these productions, whether the directors or the actors, the producers, or whoever, this sheds light on what are their motivations in making these films. And so, yeah, it's in the O'Neill book that actually O'Neill cites somebody who says that Polanski was a demoralization agent and that his films were meant to demoralize. And I was really pleased to read that because I had already written this piece on Chinatown with that being kind of my thesis. And it seems to be corroborated by people who knew Polanski and had a feel for the industry and why he was brought over and the kind of movies that he would have been making and why he would have been making them. So that's the kind of demoralization part of things. And yeah, it was Brett who reminded me that Huston is in some sense involved in the Black Dahlia because of his friendship with Hodel, who of course was committing incest, raping his own daughter. And according to the daughter in question, she claims Huston himself was a rapist as well. That in fact Huston himself had tried to rape her when she was a young girl. So and again, these are not these are well-established, facts and claims, and you can find them just through a simple internet search. You don't have to go into archives. There's been plenty written about it. Jason Horsley's written a lot about it. We've all cited the same sources, interviews, but nobody talks about this out in the mainstream media, right? No one says that, well, one of the most canonic Hollywood directors of all time, John Huston, apparently was a child rapist. He was involved in all these bizarre occult murders through his friendship with Odell, that he was involved in all these fatal car accidents. They don't talk about that kind of stuff. And of course, Polanski is another can of worms himself, not only because of the Manson murders with Sharon Tate, but then also his own abuse of the young girl. And apparently the abuse that you said continued even after he left to France.
Yeah, there's like 5 or 10 victims in France. So same type of thing. The girl, it was 77, and then he got convicted and skipped sentencing, which is, even that is kind of sus and very Chinatown.
Well, that's what happens with Huston, right? I mean, the man runs this woman over on Sunset Boulevard, and he doesn't go to prison.
No,
right?
Incredible.
So it's like these charmed lives. We've all learned the lesson, even the public, through something like Epstein, right? Where these guys get at most a slap on the wrist. So that's really the question: is how do they become, as Cross, as Evelyn Mulray herself says of Cross at the end of Chinatown, above the law, right?
No,
That's what they figure out. Is like they run the police, they own the police, they run the courts, they run the media. This is another subplot or subtext in the film that I try to focus in on, of course, in the piece. But the function of the newspaper in Chinatown is that it never actually reports what's really going on, right? And in fact, it's really just like parapolitically, it's this place of one address where the elites sort of duke it out with each other through their own criminal underworld, and they blackmail each other and extort each other. But it's where they make all their chess moves. But it has nothing to do about telling the truth to the public about the kind of crime that's actually going on, right? Because of course, the people who should be getting exposed in the paper are the people who are friends with the newspaper owners.
Right. But they're willing to post the salacious stuff of the guy with his mistress, right?
So, exactly. Well, this is what we learned, of course, with Jeffrey Epstein. Like everybody knows, the infamous clip with Amy Robach of ABC, where she's not denying that she knows what Epstein was doing with Clinton. She just says, well, she's upset later that she never got to break the story because the Clintons told ABC not to run it. Right. So this is exactly what we see going on in Chinatown as well.
Do you know that Rose McGowan said that Harvey Weinstein's victims that he raped is somewhere between 1,000 to 2,000?
It doesn't surprise me. I mean, these people,
like, that's incredible. That's how much cover up. I mean, the whole story was a catch and kill by what's the son of Mia Farrow's son, the Farrow son.
Yeah.
Anyway, but that whole thing was just showed how ornate it was.
Look at the whole thing with Anne Hesh or Hesh. I mean, whatever was going on there, I mean, that's the kind of stuff they can get away with. Like right in public with a news helicopter, you get taken away by the fire department when you're evidently trying to get out of a burn bag, and then you're never heard from again. I mean, very Daniel Hastings, like with the way the car was accelerating. Go back to this theme about car wrecks, right? Oliver Stone, I was saying about Blowout and Huston. There's something cultish going on with cars and car accidents. They like car accidents, and Polanski obviously is someone who knew about this.
Yeah, Hastings' car blew up before it hit the tree. So,
yes,
like the engine actually came out of the car.
Yeah,
Like,
it was ejected. Yeah,
yeah,
yes.
like
Yeah.
incredible. Like, wow, this is almost a miraculous. It's almost like a Hollywood stunt, like what happened to his car. And they took him, and the medical examiner, they never saw his body either. I mean,
Oh yeah, no, I know you. Before we went live, you were talking about the corruption with the medical examiner in Chinatown and how the deaths were covered up. I don't know if you want to say something about that or something about how this all maybe relates
it's
somehow
just
to the smiley face killing or whatever.
yeah,
But
it is. I mean, it's just evidence of like what's playing out in real life. It really is. The medical examiner covers up 2 water deaths, and then I think it was the main character. I mean, the guy who died, who was Hollis, was moved, right? So the insinuation as he drowned in that pool, and then moved to the river or the ocean or whatever where he was found. I forgot. Right. So like he had salt water, or he had regular water in his lungs. He was found in salt water. Is that right?
what it was is the details get complicated, so hopefully I don't make a mistake. But I thought about this for so long. I watched this movie so many times in writing this piece, and then I just kind of got tired of Chinatown, so I haven't thought about it after having to submit the copy. But my recollection is that the way it all works out in the end is that we come to find that Hollis was murdered by Cross at Hollis's home in a little saltwater pond, garden pond. And then he was moved, obviously, I don't think by Cross himself, his henchman, to a dam where it was staged that he had had an accident.
Right.
So, and then what happens is that people find out that this was what it was. It was staged because he had salt in his lungs, even though he shouldn't have, because, of course, the dam was fresh water.
Right. That's what it was. And that's why. So Giddis finds either his glasses or something in that pond, right?
He almost, well, he does. I mean, that's the interesting. He finds it, but he doesn't know what he finds, because the very first time that he visits the Mulray's house, when he's first looking to find Hollis, because he's doing the infidelity investigation. This is before Hollis's body has been found. He sees the glasses, Hollis's glasses, or sorry, well, they're actually Noah Cross's glasses, but
so
we see Noah Cross's glasses in the pond. But before they can get fished out, Evelyn comes and he gets distracted. And so it's not till later that we figure out that actually those were Noah Cross's glasses left in the pond from when he murdered Hollis.
That's what it is. That's right. And it's
but
subtle.
Yeah, the smiley face tie-in here again is that in the face of all the forensic evidence of what's clearly a homicide, it will be ruled an accidental death or a drowning. And everybody more or less is willing to go along with it. In fact, it's the scene in the morgue when Evelyn Mulray is brought to the morgue to speak to the police and to talk to the coroner about identifying the body. The police immediately suggest it was a suicide. And she says, no, it's not. And although it clearly looks to be a murder, I mean, to me, it looked like Hollis had even been beaten or choked when we're shown his face.
Like he had rope burns around his neck or something, right?
They rule it accidental drowning, just like the smiley
face killer, Dakota James. Like, this is incredible. It really is something else that this like predates this phenomenon by.
Yeah, this is the 70s, right? So then you wonder. I mean, is this life imitating art where people are getting this? Or my hunch is that the kind of murders that are going on that are now being documented by you and other researchers that are called smiley face killings, these were going on probably even back at the time, and Polanski knew about this because Polanski's the kind of guy who's involved, knows about the people who are doing these kinds of things today.
He's a dark actor, right? So how many of these people, or how many accidental drownings are there in the past before the internet that were publicized as Joe accidentally drowned, or now Joe accidentally drowned? We don't even know what happened.
Yeah. Now, I mean, it's like people can go on Twitter. They can say, my son's missing, my friend's missing, my boyfriend's missing. And even if the mainstream media won't cover it up, won't cover it, or even if the local police department keeps insisting that these are accidental drownings, everybody figures out these are murders. But 50 years ago in the 70s, when all you had was a newspaper, this is exactly what happens in Chinatown. Giddis goes to the second in command at the water department, Yelbert, and says, "Oh, I'm going to go off to Whitey Merholtz or whatever his name is and blow the lid off this." And the guy's basically telling Giddis, "No, you're not, because the newspaper is not going to report any of this."
Right. It's incredible. It's so incredible. It's just one big Chinatown now.
It is.
The whole the United States is one.
The whole world.
Yeah,
the whole world.
It probably has been.
I think Polanski knows this too. I think at the deepest level, like what Polanski is in part doing here is he's giving a kind of like apology for evil. I think it's like a grandiose rationalization of his own lifestyle and those of others that like somehow it's pointless to resist evil, so you just have to join it. That's why I think he has the so-called hero Giddis fail at the end. Is that Giddis is supposed to learn the futility of fighting evil, and I think that this is a kind of rationalization on Polanski and the Hollywood system's own part for engaging in the kind of evil they do. That there's supposedly some kind of fatalism or necessity to evil in this world it's pointless to resist it. I think what's going on.
Right. It's easier to adapt to it and try to get through it than actually, stomp your foot down or whatever, or challenge it. Right? Isn't that the consistent theme? Knowing and then not knowing. Like I think you repeat, "Let sleeping dogs lie" is one of the phrases from the movies. You're better off knowing. Go home and forget everything. Right?
That's I mean, so there's this kind of like, Greek tragedy. The irony is like the hero finally like realizes that something about his own character leads to his own downfall. And so in the case of Giddis, what happens is that he basically fails to take his own advice. So when he has these clients come in, first with the woman posing as Evelyn Mulray, but then also the husband who just found out before she comes in that his wife had been cheating on him. Giddis is giving them advice about how to take it or how to manage their affairs. And so he says, yeah, as you mentioned, let sleeping dogs lie. And, sometimes you're better off not knowing. Then, of course, these are supposed to be the life lessons, the rules of thumb, as it were, that Polanski shows us Giddis himself violates because he becomes curious, right? So the idea is that his curiosity gets the better of him because he wants to know. And so then it's in his quest to know that he ends up basically, not producing his own downfall in a way, but ultimately the downfall of Evelyn Mulray, the woman who he thinks he wants to protect. And I would just add, kind of with an eye to part 3 of this installment that's going to be focusing on Year of the Dragon and the depiction of the male protagonist, the police detective, in this case played by Mickey Rourke, Stanley. I mean, there's a complete and total subversion of the male hero archetype by the time we get into the 80s neo-noir, which you can already see pretty clearly in the 70s with Giddis, although it's slightly more ambivalent. So, I did say that Giddis is kind of a bumbler. He's not as suave as he thinks. He's clearly over his head, but he is savvy in a way. And although he is somewhat unscrupulous, and there is this open question about whether or not he isn't above corruption, he's not a completely evil man either, even though he is cynical. But by the time we get into the 80s with Stanley, the Mickey Rourke character, it's clear that he's a deeply damaged, flawed man, and that he's entirely deceived with the idea that he is good. And so this is what Stone and Cimino are showing us, that like the idea that there is such a thing as a good guy who wants to know for the sake of knowing to stop evil, that itself is the final myth. And so that to me is like the final kind of last act of demoralization in the history of noir, is that you started the classical noir period in the 40s and 50s with this idea that the character is taken seriously, right? The audience is supposed to take seriously the idea that there's this good man who's standing alone, who for good reasons is fighting against all odds in the pursuit of justice, trying to protect the innocent, and genuinely interested in getting to the bottom of things, no matter what the costs are to himself. By the time we get to the end of the genre in the 80s and then onward with like later, Bryan Singer's films like The Usual Suspects or LA Confidential, the moral lines are completely blurred to the point where really there's no ultimate difference between the good guys and the bad guys. Everybody's flawed. Everybody in a way is evil. And it's just everything's painted in gray. And in Chinatown, I think is a really important moment in the evolution of the genre, where we see that transition occur from the old Hollywood classical noir hero into what we now recognize as the fatally flawed anti-hero of the neo-noir period.
Yeah, it's an amazing article. People have to go read that. I mean, it really just opened up how important this film is, like from different angles, really, because it's almost like he's going through all the levels of corruption, right? It's almost like you got sexual corruption, public corruption, political corruption, financial corruption, murder, incest, and then finishes off with the most horrible thing of all, which is child ends up dead, right? So
It's all there. It's all there, and the details are exquisite. I mean, it is in a way a magnificent film. I mean, that's what makes it so, I would say, evil in a way.
Yeah.
Right? That Polanski crafts this cinematic masterpiece that even 50 years on is still so, as it were, watchable, despite the fact that we know it was made by these incredibly evil men who are, in my view, purveying what was knowingly and deliberately intended to be an incredibly pernicious and damaging message to the public. It's still, for all that, in a way, a good movie considered just strictly from an aesthetic measure of success or failure.
Yeah, just the background. I mean, whoever did the sets and the scenes and the houses and all that stuff.
And the
Little piece of
score,
Avalon, yeah.
the music and the acting, and I mean, a lot of people, it's common to say like Robert Towne's screenplay was like, people who know these things, I don't, they say it's like one of the greatest screenplays ever written, and so
yeah, and even the actress, wasn't it a Robert Evans? Yeah, Robert Evans, who's later on would be Cotton Club, just like the most corrupt movie production in human history. Like, incredible. Like, these stories, it's really dark, and the corruption it's so multifaceted. It's really hard. Almost like when you look back and get a wide angle and comprehend it all, you can see why people get demoralized. But like, these people sold their souls, like a lot of the actors in the film.
Well, yeah, I mean, let's look at Jack Nicholson.
Yeah.
I mean, Nicholson lives on Mulholland Drive. He lives in the house where Polanski committed the rape of the young girl, which is weird when you think about it. And of course, there's the story that's now more or less well known about Nicholson himself finding out the bizarre nature of his own mother and sister, and about how that was dropped on him right around the time the movie was released. So I think that was a humiliation ritual that he was being warned. In other words, that he's a dupe. So what I think was going on there in part was that Nicholson, who is a very smart guy, and I think probably was prone to thinking that he could master the game of Hollywood blackmail. He was being told, "Hey, bud, watch out, because maybe you don't really know as much as you think you do, because here's a bunch of reporters that are going to call you and tell you something about your own life that you didn't even know, that almost directly mirrors what was going on in Chinatown as well."
Chinatown upbringing, incredible. And long-term boyfriend of Angelica Houston. I don't know if they ever got married, but I think they were together for a decade or something like that. So like, it's even a stranger tie to John Huston, who's, yeah, that's a whole nother story. It's really nice to talk to you again, Stephen. Where can people read this article?
You can find it at the Decoding Culture Foundation website. It's in, like as I said, the first issue of Cultural Engineering Studies, so you can find it directly there. I've also posted it to my Twitter account and my website as well. It's free to download. The entire magazine is free as well. Currently, it's available online only, but there's going to be a print run next year when issue 2 is released, so you'll be able to get it in print as well. And then, as I said, this is just the first of a 3-part essay. So people who are familiar with Chinatown might be wondering, well, what's really the payoff here? You're going to have to wait for part 2, which, as I said, is already done. There's something that I think I saw at the end of Chinatown that hasn't been commented on very often, and which I think goes to the heart of my thesis about revelation of the method and Dave McGowan and police contracts, murders. I won't get into that detail here because I want people to read it for themselves when part 2 is released. But yeah, that's where you can find the magazine. You can find the article there, and I think the second issue will be out early sometime in the spring next year.
And you have I have a stack of your books. You've written many books, philosophy, others, and fiction as well too, right?
Yeah, I have a number of philosophy books that I've written. So, 2 books that aren't really necessarily academically oriented. They're accessible, I think, to anyone. Would be a book I wrote in 2022 called In the Spirit, and then a second book I wrote that year called Faint Not. Those are 2 books that I recommend. The fiction as well, people may like. Elijah Newman Died Today, and then a trilogy called Everything. And finally, I guess what I can say as well is that this essay, the 3 parts, is going to form just one very long, maybe 2 chapters in what's a book. So I'm currently working on a book on film noir right now, which, God willing, I'm hoping will be out next year. So if people read this article and they're interested in the way in which I'm trying to interpret film noir, they'll want to maybe keep their eye out for that book that will be out next year.
And if people have any questions or want to reach out to you, where can they do that?
They could just send me an email. I try to answer email from everybody, so I'm easy to get a hold of. Yeah.
What's your email address?
I have two email addresses, one of which is stevendelayphilosophy@gmail.com. And then I have another email address, which is steven.delay@wolf, WOOLF, .university. So either Stephen Delay Philosophy at Gmail or Steven.delay@wolf.university.
Great. Now we'll put links to the Decoding Culture Foundation website and this first issue so people can read through it themselves. I highly recommend people read this article. And its title again is Forget It, Jake, It's Chinatown, Revelation of the Method and Cultural Demoralization in Film Noir, Part 1. And again, the author is Steven Delay, Delay. Steven, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, stay there.